It's bigger. So it's like, it's like transdisciplinary is more than just disciplinary.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let's see, whose article is this that we're, oh, this is the one where
254, but
you're going to have to start it because
yeah.
I don't have until 2:53. So I don't know what the starting page number is, but
251 is the starting page.
251. Right. All right. So good morning, everyone. As you may, first of all, I want to point out that if you go to this link on the um, chat, um, you can register to receive notices about these sessions so that I send you the link every week if you want it. And so that's that. And good morning. Okay, so this is the week where we're in the midst of um, this book, which is Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. And except that on my early copy, I don't think this happened on later editions, but on my early copy, 8 pages are left out. And so Jordan has the 8 pages, and so he's going to begin reading today. And then, and I guess this starts on page 251 of this book. And I can pick it up somewhere around 253. So without further ado, please, if you want a regular notice about this or any of our sessions, mainly the only sessions I'm doing these days are Sunday morning at 10 and Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And so those are the main ones. However, I'm hoping to do a wisdom path at some point in the near future. I have to get that together. And that will have a separate notice. So if you sign up for Wisdom Path, then you'll receive the notice for that as well. I'll probably send that one out to everybody on all my lists because it's going to be Melissa Townsend talking about her new book in time for Christmas, which is the 3rd volume of the Sutras of Patanjali. She had done 2 earlier volumes with the 1st and 2nd quarters of it. So this is the 3rd one, and there'll be one more. And okay, so Kathy, are you saying you've gone onto that link and you've clicked on the Sunday morning link and you're still not getting the Sunday morning link? Just responding to Kathy. Because we've had problems with MailChimp not getting out.
I just got it, so I just forwarded it to her.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it just came across my email too. So
Oh, the notice or the link?
the notice, which should have the link in it. I didn't read it.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah, new MailChimp. Yeah, they can always register to receive these weekly reminders here, new MailChimp, and then the link. And then the link for this morning. Yeah, it's a short link for MailChimp, and then the link for this morning is the full link with the password and webinar and all that.
right. Okay. So I'm glad you can find us, Kathy. I did mail you something last week you'll be actually one of the first to get it. So I hope it is received in the next couple of days. And anyway, okay. So, Jordan, you are on to read the beginning of this piece here.
Okay, the Red Book for Dionysus, a literary and transdisciplinary interpretation by author Susan Rowland. Although not produced under artistic auspices, the distinctive qualities of Jung's The Red Book invite a literary as well as multidisciplinary approach. And yet the work is peculiarly dismembered if considered through the conventional criteria for literature, psychology, art, or science. Not published by its writer and painter, the Red Book is unauthorized, unfinished, and unclaimed by canons of literary genres or psychology's more rational aims. My chapter will suggest that the Red Book is Dionysian. It enacts the god in its raw tearing apart of disciplinary norms and artistic conventions. The Red Book is fated to be remembered by its home in the terrifyingly dismembering 21st century, in which multinational, political, and institutional norms are being torn up. On the other hand, Dionysus, god of comic and tragic drama, also provides a pathway to a remembering of knowing and being that promises a renewed consciousness in touch with instinctual life, or in italics, Zoe, Z-O-E, or Zoe. Using James Hillman's analysis of Dionysus and Jung, I argue that the Red Book heralds a remembered transdisciplinary future. Jung anticipates the 21st century paradigm that reconciles a post-quantum vision of reality with its social potential for a world of co-evolving, democratizing, and personal fulfillment. First section, entitled The Problem of Literature in the Red Book. The Red Book, with astonishing paintings and handwritten text, looks like a work of literature of an earlier era, that of medieval illustrated manuscripts. In doing so, as Matthew Spano and John Beebe superbly demonstrates, it corresponds to artistic innovation at the time of its composition. The literary modernism of the period 1910 to 1940 fragmented traditional forms and genres, showed a predilection for myth, challenged established norms of rationality, and made a point of returning to the past in order to reconfigure art for the new industrial and alienated modern age. In this sense, the Red Book is a lost work of literary modernism belonging to the artistic heritage of the early 20th century. And yet, its author, C.G. Jung, was famously dissatisfied with its ultimate form. He neither finished nor published the work, writing in the posthumously published Memories, Dreams, Reflections, quote, "In the Red Book, I tried an aesthetic elaboration of my fantasies, but never finished it. I became aware that I had not yet found the right language, that I still had to translate it into something else." In quotes, aesthetic elaboration does not work for Jung, the psychologist. And so the collected works are the result of this decision to change the style of his writing. I have written elsewhere of the important epistemological consequences of the literariness of the collected works, and here want to continue exploring the uncanny liminality of literature and Jungian psychology. After all, a psychology dedicated to a psyche defined by possessing inherently creative archetypes has something to say to our contemporary sense that literature is imaginative, largely fictional writing. On the other hand, the Red Book is itself a clue that defining literature this way is localized, historical accident. For the medieval period, indeed from the start of the written culture, in quotes, literature was valued writing and its major genre, poetry, the vehicle for history, philosophy, stories, legends, and the pre-modern science of alchemy. Not until the Romanticism of the 18th century cemented the split from the rationality of the Enlightenment by deliberately exploring fantasy, ecstatic poetry, the uncanny, and seeking new literary canons of the imagination did, in quotes, literature come to be associated entirely with the fictional imagination accident. The Red Book, while offering aesthetic forms from an age far removed from current disciplinary divisions between literature and psychology, was fated to be rejected by its author for not conforming to them. Yet it is worth looking more closely at what is at stake in these disciplinary divisions as they continue to haunt the success of the work as a 21st century publication. For example, there is a crucial issue in how the category of literature as the fictional imaginal has come to be studied in universities. Like psychology itself, literary studies was invented in the 19th century under the influence of the proliferation of disciplines sponsored by the dominance of empirical science. These new disciplines were the, in quotes, social sciences, meant to employ the objectivity of science to human and cultural matters. Objectivity means just what the Red Book laments, that Jung had found the human soul. I had, in quotes, I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. Similar, in quotes, objectivity pervaded literary studies in the 20th century with the determination of its new criticism that the text was an object, sufficient in itself to generate knowledge with no participation from either the personality of its author or its reader. Known as the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy, with an A, affective, a literary work was not to be understood by reference to its author's intentional meaning, nor how it affects or makes the reader feel. Rather, the, in quotes, close reading inaugurated by the new criticism and still in use today insisted upon the primary reality of literature as object. Here we see disciplinary division as a primary severing of being. For the new psychology, psyche, or soul, is the reality to be studied, with the Red Book itself showing the high cost of so-called scientific objectivity. For literary studies, the text is a primary reality. While new criticism is no longer a dominant literary theory in universities, being as textual remains its central concern. It is also fascinating to realize that these now parallel and split ways of knowing and being developed strikingly similar research strategies in the early 20th century. For, in comparing Jung's active imagination, a key ingredient in composing his Red Book with new criticism's close reading, it is possible to see both working with the autonomy of the image. For Jung, the image is primarily psychic, but can manifest in words. For the new critics, the image is in the words of the literary text, but can inspire some psychic mobility. In effect, close reading combines Jung's active imagination and simplification, as I have suggested elsewhere. What is in psychology, allowing the image to assume its own reality and being, as in an active imagination, and then amplifying it by comparison to collective sources, becomes in literary studies the autonomy of images in the literary work that point to other literary works in the new critical practice. with parallel strategies divided by disciplinary dismembering, it is time to look at the myth of such atomizing of being in knowing. And then we get into the next chapter, which is Dionysus and Jung's writings. So I guess she's setting the tone that objectivity and art, rather than objectivity and subjectivity, are probably primary. Oh, you're muted.
All right. Okay. I'm going to just put my piece back up on the screen for a minute because I want to emphasize a distinction between Jung's psychology and Freud's. And also it relates to this essay. Okay, the name of this piece is Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. And the point is that everything that the human species ever did is in these railroad tracks, these tracks through this painting. But they ignore the magnificence of the world. Okay, so for example, if you're doing just literary criticism and you're referring to somebody else's words, you're just on a different track, but you're referring to that other track without ever appreciating what the magnificence is. And in terms of literature, let me just highlight, for example, a novel. When you read a novel, if the novelist has done a good job, you won't see the words, you see the pictures that the novelist is painting. And one thing you can be sure of is that those pictures are not going to be like anybody else's pictures as they're reading the novel. Okay, in other words, if I were to, describe a fence or speak of an elephant, everybody has a different view of what a fence looks like, and everybody has a different view of what an elephant looks like. But if you string a lot of these images together, we get an approximation of what the author was talking about. And so literary criticism per se, just for the sake of talking about somebody else's words, is like just being on one of these tracks and talking about somebody else's track. And it isn't talking about the magnificence of the experience of reading the novel. And, if you ever go to a movie that's based on a novel, you're going to say either, oh, that was wonderful, it's just how I imagined the novel, or, oh, it didn't live up to the novel, type thing. And so Freud and all the psychologists that follow him, who are reductionists, they are all trying to put psychology on one of these railroad tracks. And they have done, written tens of thousands of books, but every book is just another set of railroad tracks. And until you appreciate what Jung was talking about, which is the magnificence of the whole, you're not going to get what Jung was about. And this is why I keep putting up this pale blue dot image, not the one that's in Scientific American, but this one, which I'm going to show you again here. And I did discover my mistake, by the way. I do have a mistake vis-a-vis this image. Okay, so here, whoops. Here. Why is that not working?
But I think you bring up when you the different
Okay, wait a minute.
track,
Wait a
when you
minute.
say a different track, um,
Go ahead, yeah.
in regards to literary criticism, there's the description of an other or description of something outside yourself, so object or allegedly objective, versus the direct experience, which is psychology in the whole, WHOLE. And so I think that totality of the experiential is often written off by literary criticists as being anti-intellectual. And I hope so, because what happens is then all intellectual is just a bunch of chaff with not a lot of wheat. You get a lot of talk, 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 but it's talk about talk instead of experiencing what the story is personally.
Right. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about. And I recently discovered I was reading about the pale blue dot, and there were two pale blue dots. There was one back in 1987, uh, which was the first pale blue dot. It's harder to see, so I'm not showing that one right now. But this particular picture of the pale blue dot is called The Day the Earth Smiled. And it was because when this picture was taken from the Cassini spacecraft, that's why Saturn is in the picture, because it's Cassini. And they were planning it from NASA um, uh, for weeks, if days, if not weeks. And so they announced to the world that they were going to take this picture, and please look up and smile when you do it so that the earth will be smiling back. And so this was July 19th, 2013, when Cassini took this picture of the earth. The pale blue dot, which Carolyn Porco took in 1987, was something that was very hard to see. Um, and so anyway, but the point is that everything that humanity has ever done since the beginning came on that pale blue dot, everything. And with a few exceptions to stuff that went to the moon and a few spacecraft that went out into the universe, everything else is limited to that. And so, you can criticize things based on, how somebody else put it down in letters, but the idea is the experience. Okay, and that's the difference between Jung and Freud. Jung was very experiential, and he was talking about the experience of his visions, for example, in the Red Book. And okay, wrote 20 volumes, but those 20 volumes were all back to the logos, working it out and trying to explain it, right?
Right.
And so it sometimes takes people a long time to grok it, that Jung is not talking about anything that you can read about. Jung is talking about an experience that only you can have. It's like the experience of reading a novel. Okay, people can criticize whether he did the paragraph right, I guess, type thing. But um, but they can't really criticize how you experienced the paragraph, the novel, as you were reading it.
Right,
So
because his paragraphs are not 6 sentence intro body exit, intro body exit. It's not this honestly boring indoctrinated structure the words this way, which is basically just putting prose in a poetic meter in terms of the 1 3 or 1 4 1 or 2 3 1. I mean, so the paragraph structure disappears, is dismembered, and in that sense, beyond even his paragraphs being whole thoughts, reading Jung is like rock hounding. You can jump back and forth and look at the pretty rocks. Which ones do you pick up? Which ones do you leave? So if I look at those rocks, they're objects. The paragraphs become objects of the object of a thought. And I
right.
think that that's important because in that sense, he transcended the literary in its meter and its form. And
But then a thought per se is an experience,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Yes, and I think then that, I mean, I say both and,
Yeah.
Debbie says otherness included.
Right.
And to me, when you look at the experience, you are operating as the otherness together with the not otherness. I mean, so
Right.
the pale blue dot there, and especially there with scale, I mean, looking through Saturn's rings.
Yeah.
So then we are looking from the other back to ourselves. And Saturn having rings and Earth having only rings of trash spacecraft, um, you know, you know,
Yeah.
space debris. There's a distinction and there's a distinction in the difference.
Yeah.
Saturn is, a gas planet, but allegedly a failed star. I mean, so there's all these kinds of things that go on with call Saturn the novel
Yeah.
and call Earth the movie. Which one's better? Well, neither. And I always joke that the movie's always better because then I don't have to work. I don't have to create. I get a break.
Right. Okay. So the point about this is that it's both. This is a work of
Right.
art, okay, that is both it contains within it both the logos and the eros. Okay. So the logos is the railroad tracks, and the eros is uh, the the color, the magnificent color that it emerges from various parts of the image. Okay, for example, the color that comes out around this blob. Okay, this is a blob that was on the original, and uh, the this color sort of emerged from out from under it, and it's not a railroad track per se because it's not human made. It's made by the forces of nature, right?
Right.
Uh, and so all these things that are made by the forces of nature um, are, part of the experience. But then the tracks are limited by uh, the way this was put together.
Well, and if you
So
look at that with the blob and then the colors that emerge from under it, I mean, you're dealing with hydraulics, laminar flow, and the relative to the viscosity and density of a particular pigment. I mean, the greens are probably quick and slippery, and the reds may go slower and they're heavier. I mean,
mhm.
you get or the absolute opposite of that. I mean, because even with oil paints, Viridian, and you're going to slip and slide like the old game, the
Yeah.
vinyl that you pour hose on. Whereas Königsblau, King's Blue, it's kind of trudging through the snow. I mean, it's a thicker, slower. So even with not only the frequencies of the colors, but the viscosities of the pigments, you're playing all these things in, on, and around and through the tracks. So in that
Right.
sense, it's kind of the OM, the AUM, the four character voice of the universe, where the fourth character is that otherness, both and the silence and the space between and around. So visually, this becomes object. Visually, it also can be a symbol. Whereas I think, Jung has been, said, we are real, not object. I think one of his characters said.
Yeah.
And I think we are real and we also can be symbol. And I think when you get to the symbol part, then that's the we are all God. And so we're that small fractal.
Right. And there's most of my painting is very pedantic, okay? But this painting was done in an hour and a half, and I did it very quickly. And, I probably did other things during the course of it because the tracks probably didn't take me more than 2 minutes to put down the
Mm-hmm.
tracks, right? And it it was done as a kind of I was experiencing an emotion and I wanted to put it down, and I wasn't trying to describe anything. And then I thought I was going to do something with this, but when I looked at it, I said, well, oh my God, this is a summation of Jungian psychology, actually.
Well, yeah, it reminds me a lot. I remember the first painting I sold, and someone walked up and said, I know your neighbor, and I know that took you 2.5 hours. How did that just sell for the price of a small car? It only took you 2.5 hours. And I
Mhm.
said, no, it didn't. It took my whole life up to that point. And I
Yeah,
think that's the piece, the experience included. I mean, what's the old merchant marine plumber's story? The boiler's not working,
yeah.
and he walks up and um, he taps it and he taps it and he taps it. And at a certain point, he draws a chalk line, points to there, points to the foreman, and the foreman does the work and the boiler works again.
Hmm.
Well, so the next day they get an invoice for $10,000. And they say, well, you just drew a chalk line and pointed someone else to it and then pointed again. How are you charging us $10,000? He goes, well, it was $1 for the chalk line and $9,999 to know where to put it.
Right. Okay, so there are some comments here from Kathy and Richard. Kathy says, point is resonant to a degree. I feel for the magic in all things, and I concur with that. How can we best apply that here online to the magnificence so the magnificence is caught? And yeah, the point is that whatever it is that Jordan and I are doing right now is going to be part of the railroad tracks. And this video, whether it's live now or uh, left on YouTube for a few generations, uh, you can catch what we're talking about, and it is magnificent, but it isn't in the celluloid of a video or the pixels of a video or whatever you want to call it, the pixels and etc. It's what you get out of it. And so she says, I'm extremely psychic most days and pick up on underlying subtleties that are overlooked and seldom spoken to. Most folk would rather not be bothered. It's the magical things in the universe. Yeah. Yes, on the experience from perspective, we're all invited to see the sparkle from our lens, right? And Richard says, I see a human egg about to be fertilized today. Okay, well, you can see
Mm-hmm. That's
whatever
what's cool
floats your
is that
boat. That's the
you
thing.
see your story. I mean, and And you don't even have to have it be your story. You can see what you see and not even believe it, but you still saw it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's, I think that's what's interesting is don't believe everything you think, don't believe everything
right.
you see.
And it speaks to how religions work. I mean, you go to a religious ceremony on a Sunday morning, and I suppose our session here competes with a lot of them. But the reality is, it's not really the detail of what's in the Bible and the preacher preaching on it uh, and what's in the hymn and how it's played on the organ. Uh, it's really how you emotionally experience those things, right? And Jordan and I guess, are both thinking guys. So in the Myers-Briggs context, we're more logos oriented. Um, and so we want to mansplain everything. but, but mansplaining doesn't get it. It only takes you so far. You have to take the step off to see the magic that Kathy's talking about. And she says, magnificence is the gratitude that I get to be here for all of it. This thing called life, now downplaying the subject, but it's still like reading psychological tea leaves. Yes, it is. That's what Richard says. Yeah, it's like reading psychological tea leaves, but um, the the books of the Bible have been settled since 325 AD, I guess, since the conference of Nicaea. And
Yeah, and reading like reading tea leaves, there's a certain negative pejorative connotation there as if
right,
that's not good or meaningful. And the reality is, I think that's really prone to too much Greek capital R reason. And I think that experience is the place of reasons are unreasonable. It just simply is. Um,
right,
you can
exactly.
say there are no straight lines in nature, and you can give me thousands of examples, but then I'll turn around and say, what about a crystalline lattice structure? Oops, now that's wrong. Except what is that? It's an exception. It's part of the whole. It's actually the other within it that, in a sense, substantiates the first part. Nature knows no line. Well, maybe the crystal doesn't either. It's just two intersecting facets. So, that's a similar piece, just one is less obvious. But I think the tea leaves thing is a really good way to put in reasons are often unreasonable. In
Right.
experience, it's about the otherness included, operating as and with the otherness, both and.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think when we pigeonhole things into, oh, it's just, here's the thing. When people say it's just tea leaves,
Yeah.
I'd say
Right.
I'd say no, it's simply tea leaves.
Yeah.
And you can just change the tenor by one word, but
Sure.
I think that also becomes what's the old physics question? Is hell exothermic or endothermic? And and all the people go through all these different examples. And then this one guy, Frank, says, well, if hell freezes over, it must be endothermic because the volume of things coming in, because all religions say everyone else is going to hell. So that's always going to be an increase in volume exponentially. But if it's not an increase in space, it's going to get too dense and it's going to die. But if hell is always increasing, then when hell freezes over, not a chance in hell kind of thing, and it goes back and forth, or everything goes to hell. It explodes. Well, there's exothermic, but then he stops, and at the end he goes, "It's kind of like last year when I approached Nancy, and she said, not a cold day in hell will I have sexual relations with you." And so he goes through a couple more things, and he goes, so certainly, it's because of that, it's not number two. It's not endothermic where it's going to hell freeze us over. There's just, it's all hell breaking loose, no chance in hell. So because of Nancy and because of the previous, I think hell is endothermic. And it's the kind of thing where it makes so much sense. It's not worth a damn, except he played it with humor.
Right.
So it takes the question outside of the question.
Yeah. So Kathy says mansplain equals magic drain. Very good. I think that's right on.
Nice.
Logos and eros, they simply are.
Mhm.
And hello, Bush. Bush is Garden of Earthly Delights. Yeah.
And we always say
You're talking
logos.
about Hieronymus Bosch's. Yeah.
Well, we all always say logos and eros, logos and eros. But if we add storge and agape to logos, because once we say eros, we have four different differentiations at least. Agape, erotic, or agape, eros, storge, filial, different kinds of love. And so what's interesting is then with logos, well, in that sense, logos is just a camera shot experiential, but it's a snapshot and prone to become dead and brittle because it's a single moment. Whereas you get the eros part, that's just life. It's experience. It's all of it all the time.
Yeah.
And
okay, well, we've
beaten a horse dead, so
we've
we
been
can stop kicking it.
beating the dead horse, so let us go on. Um, and I think a lot of us like Hieronymus Bosch, and if you don't know what it is, you need to look it up on the internet.
Well, it's like there are thousands of stories per story, and you have to go into the different characters, and then you get into you get into gore and porn and humor and dictionaries, and he gets into everything because he just kind of throws everything in there. It's kind of like the Where's Waldo existentially, because there is no Waldo. I mean, you can just keep looking and looking and looking and get something new.
Okay, so Dionysus and Jung's writings. Prior to the publication of the Red Book, James Hillman's essay, Dionysus in Jung's Writings, pointed out that C.G. Jung stresses dismemberment as his primary focus in the many myths of the god Dionysus. In Jung's treatment of the dismemberment of the divine being, Hillman sees a germ of psychic rejuvenation in the corporal breaking apart of an aging god. He calls Christian modernity too Apollonian, too distancing, rational, and dualistic. So in Hillman's view, an era dominated by one god, defined by rationality and dismemberment, is to be followed by dismemberment, which will release multiple stories of being in Hillman's preferred polytheistic approach to psyche. I hear suggest that the Red Book, in its complex relations to literature and psychology, demonstrates that Jung's dismembering of Dionysus has possibilities unexplored by Hillman. According to Hillman, Jung sees a two-stage dismembering process. First comes a division into opposites, such as the very notion of the Apollonian and Dionysian itself, the gods incarnated. This separation is celebrated in Jung's love of opposites and polarities. On the other hand, Jung, the rebalancing psychologist of the modern Western psyche, has to go further to posit something more fragmented. Here we glimpse his animism in the form of bisexual embodied ecstatic Dionysus. In the second stage of Jung's Dionysian dismemberment, the god is scattered into pieces. Now, I would just stop here for a moment and point out that in Shintoism is a religion that is practiced mainly only in weddings today in Japan, but it is an animistic religion in which everything is kami, which means God. So everything, if you look out at the mountains, the God in the mountains, but if you look at a pair of eyeglasses, uh, there's kami in that as well. So there's everything takes on an animistic aspect.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then the whole Egyptian, myth of Osiris and the dismemberment directly parallels the Dionysian. And then
Okay.
that's capital N nature. Everything always together and always apart at one and the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So dualistic opposites become multiplicity with a wider dispersal of the divine in matter, which both Jung and Hillman call archetypal. To Jung, archetypes are inherited psychic potentials for certain sorts of images, patterns, and meaning. They represent the possibility of diversity in psychic functioning, or as Hillman later puts it, a polytheistic psyche in which the goddesses and gods are multiple structures of consciousness in the world. Very importantly, Hillman insists that this second stage of Dionysian dismemberment changes the psyche profoundly. The Dionysian psychic process is an initiation into a new cosmos of fragments of the body of the god. Distance from divinity becomes interiority and animistic multiplicity within its domain of the god. In particular, do you want to comment on that, Jordan?
Actually, yeah, just to refer people to the psychologist Julian Jaynes' book called um, The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And the bicameral mind, basically 2,000 plus years ago of the ancient Egyptians, was when they heard voices, they were animals, they were things outside of themselves.
Mhm.
Where when that began to break down and integrate into what we now call consciousness, those voices were retermed thoughts. So I think there's that perspective of the Dionysian psychic process as an initiation into a new cosmos of fragments of the body of the god within the body, rather than coming from some exterior source. So I think we can look then at monotheistic as the god as the external source, and the polytheistic is just each of us as divine with all the parts within. So I think both there. But Julian Jaynes' book basically makes the point that the ancient Egyptians viewed their thoughts as coming from some other, capital O, other source. And therefore, you have the falcon, you have all these images and symbols, and they speak a visual language with their world. And it's not right or wrong, it's just a perspective of whether you have externalization or interiorization of experience, and then how that's then manifested into what you do each day.
Right. Okay, so in particular, Hillman notes that Zoe, the life force of the body in Eros, is awakened by this process of divine dismemberment. This new consciousness, or Zoe, is an intimation of wholeness that does not erode differences. The new enlivening Zoe is animistic in a particular way of awareness of its own partial consciousness, aware of itself as parts. Quote, rather, the crucial experience would be the awareness of the parts as parts, distinct from each other, dismembered, each with its own light, a state in which the body becomes conscious of itself as a composite of differences. This scintillae and fish eyes, of which Jung speaks, may be experienced as embedded in physical expressions. The distribution of Dionysus through matter may be compared with the distribution of consciousness through members, organs, and zones, unquote. Dionysian remembering is remembering a body-oriented consciousness in touch with Zoe in endless instinctual life. This consciousness is multiple, animistic, connected to the divine in matter and nature, but how connected? What does it really mean to exist in the realm of a dismembered God? To have the task of remembering divine consciousness from within.
I would
so
say
we're reading this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arsh. Go ahead, Jordan.
I'd say that's fine from the intellectual literary criticism point of view. To have the task of remembering divine consciousness from within, I would say from an experiential stance, that sounds like quite a darn hassle. And the reality is 5 words, always complete, never finished, lifelong. So rather than remembering divine consciousness from within, throughout my life, I'll just be continually exploring the inner solar system. Where's my pale blue dot? Well, I am my pale blue dot, but what do I look like from inside on Saturn? And so I think that, what does it really mean to exist in the realm of no? That I think that's a putting people on someone else's path rather than putting them off the path to find their own. Because I don't need to remember anything. The universe itself in totality is divine, and I'm just part of it.
Yeah.
So I think personally, and I'll qualify. My bent is that I made shame walk the plank, and anxiety and despair were tied to its ankles. Confidence was the name on the back of the jersey. I don't need it. It's about being unthreatened and just being your nature. So, right or wrong, to me, it's make as many mistakes as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And that way I'm doing something. But the whole, I have this daunting task of remembering the divine consciousness from within. That's the existential angst of the early 20th century of, everything's boring and dead. And I'd rather take Morticia with some black roses and she cuts the roses off and just has thorny stems, because that's a different kind of morose. Because then it's kind of fun. You can actually play in the sandbox of the dark. So,
right. Okay, so Jung's Dionysian enactment is the notion of the symbol, not in its common English meaning as a motif standing for some known meaning, but rather in his emphasis as an image expressing something not yet or possibly not ever fully known to the ego. Jung saw symbols as expressing something unknown that wants to come into being. His symbols are dynamic and alive. They provide what Hillman calls Zoe, an experience of instinctual life in their rejuvenating of consciousness. Quote, a symbol really lives only when it is the best and highest expression of something divine, but not yet known to the observer. It then compels his unconscious participation and has a life-giving and life-enhancing effect, unquote. A symbol's route to the unknown invokes the archetypal qualities of psyche. Those capacities possess roots in the instinctual body, while also extending the realm of spirit and rational knowing. Okay. So we have to distinguish sign and symbol. Okay. A sign is like a stop sign. It means one thing. The red in it and its shape means stop. Right now, this is where you stop. But as a symbol, it is symbolic of many things. It's symbolic of an unconscious agreement among all human beings that when we are on the highways, we need to know some places are better to stop than others, so that we don't go down the road and every 50 feet stop our car. Right? We know that at the end of the road there's going to be a stop sign, and also it is a culmination as a symbol. It's a culmination of all the works of humanity coming up with a sign that means all those things, everything that went on before, and how we all trust one another to drive safely, theoretically. I mean, obviously there are accidents, um, but if this weren't in general true, we couldn't get out on the highway safely. Okay. But we get out of the highway trusting that everyone's going to pretty much 99.999% of the time do what you expect them to do on the highway. And it's only, and so a stop sign has all, it's symbolic of all that which is behind it. I hope that's helpful.
Well, I think just to piggyback on that, I think signs are not totality. They're simply singular. Signs are singular, and symbols are generative, the whole. And so symbols are portals to the whole. Signs are just a piece of the whole. And, just a component, not even a fractal. I mean, the signs don't have all of it in them. So I'd say signs are singular, symbols are generative. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two, but also not get lost in the morose of the semiotic, which just kind of lulls the brain into
Right.
all the existential maladies. From my perspective.
Okay. So a symbol's route to the unknown invokes the archetypal qualities of psyche. Those capacities possess roots in the instinctual body while also extending to the realm of the spirit and rational knowing. In this context, even academic disciplinary concepts, such as those found in psychology or theories of literature, can be symbols when they do not forget their connection to the living mystery. Quote, we have to break down life and events, which are self-contained processes, into meanings, images, concepts, knowing that in doing so we are getting further away from the living mystery. Dionysus is the mythical embodiment of such living mystery. This is what Kathy was talking about, the mystery. It follows that if rational discipline knowing can break down life and events into parts and retain awareness of the living mystery, then that knowledge written in symbols is Dionysian dismemberment. I am suggesting that in the many disciplines that make up the modern Western university, we have dismembered an aging god of being, him, the masculine divine of monotheism that founded dualism, including the dualism of body and psyche. Dismembered into our many disciplines, this God is our being in materialistic rubble. However, Dionysus haunts us in the Jungian symbol, which he suggestively wrote about mainly in terms of words, which included the words of science. Since, quote, since every scientific theory contains a hypothesis, it is a symbol, unquote. Where the words of a discipline can be imagined as Jungian symbols, they turn the dead meat of our divided disciplines into scraps of the enlivening body of Dionysus. If we can regard disciplines not so much as eternally divided, but as parts that need to remember their status as parts of one body of divine knowing and being, then we know Zoe, renewed instinctual consciousness, or put another way, the vision of the Red Book. Okay,
as Kathy,
I'm going to step away for a moment. So go
Kathy
ahead.
probably knows here. I mean, the counterpoint of that is the body keeps the score. So from her perspective as yoga may know a lot more about it than me, but the vision of the Red Book is an experiential thing. And that's, when you feel bad, not always meditation, take a walk, do some exercise, get the serotonin moving. I mean, keep the body's systems flowing so that they're flushing, but also nourishing. So I think what's interesting here is this whole, that God is our being and materialistic rubble. Okay, again, dismembered. But if I just say the counterpoint of that, no, the body keeps the score. That's not rubble. I'm going to find the treasure with that dragon. And honestly, every dragon, every trouble usually has a treasure. So we can get bogged down into the dismembered chaff that's blown off in the wind. And I'll talk about the chaff all day long. It's focusing on the death and not the life. But if we focus on the wheat, we focus on the meat, the substance, what generates nourishing forward progress, or simply life and breath and all that, then the vision of the Red Book comes back as experiential and not dismembered, though it does have members. It has parts, it has components. And in that sense, if I use the word community of vision within the whole vision of the Red Book, I start to then see it more as a movie rather than a book. And I think in that sense, then the Red Book is kind of a collection of cells, almost like scene narration from a director, where we're going to do these 8 cells. These are these 8 scenes. And what happens is there's a big, big world in the space between each of them and in them. So how we connect these instinctual consciousness pieces, the vision of the Red Book is then experiential and, in a sense, a visual screenplay of the movie of the psyche from one person, Jung. And you're back.
Yeah, and you said the body keeps a score, and I was just musing on that as I hobbled my way into the bathroom. My body has certainly kept the score.
Yeah.
And it's a score you don't get to change often. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that with the body, I'll just reiterate this one point, that when the body keeps the score, when we don't feel so good, sometimes it's not meditation or healthy food. Sometimes it's just get up and moving, because the exercise gets the systems flowing, whether it's serotonin and anything else. But flowing systems nourish and flush at the same time. So the body does keep the score. And I think that's why I mentioned Kathy. She's, yoga professional. So she knows probably a great deal about that experientially, professionally. But I made the point of the vision of the Red Book is then, rather than a book, it's a collection of visual parts, almost like a director doing cells for a movie. You have these 8 cells, and we're going to perform these 8 cells and those are the 8 scenes. And then there's a space between them and within them, so that the Red Book actually becomes a visual screenplay, in a way, of the psyche, but of just one person. So us making our own Red Book, each of us, can be an inroad to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, where are we now? Did I get to
the Red Book and transdisciplinarity?
Okay.
So beyond
right.
disciplinarity.
All right. So you want to read from there? Or?
Sure. The Red Book and transdisciplinarity. Reminds me of platyhelminthes worms. Anyway, I'm going to cut one and it'll grow another one. So there's the part in the whole becoming the same again. Before looking at the Red Book as Dionysus and its span of disciplines such as literature, art, and psychology, I want to offer another perspective to academic research in the 21st century, one that originates in quantum science and theology. Inaugurated by quantum physicist Basarab Nicolescu, transdisciplinarity means beyond disciplinary severing of being. Transdisciplinarity rejects any possibility of hyperdiscipline, one capable of subsuming all human knowing into a system of perfect knowledge or ultimate truth. Rather, he emphasizes the reality, currently fragmented in many disciplines, is itself multiple. In this sense, a single godlike vision for a total knowledge gives way to a polyvalent polytheism of knowing. Dionysus arrives. By refusing a hyperdiscipline, Nicolescu does away with the traditional unified human subject of Western modernity. After the discoveries of quantum physics, he posits a new human subject for all research. No longer should research assume the primacy of the criteria of objectivity. Nicolescu's radically, in quotes, open unity means accepting that humans live on many levels of reality simultaneously. It will never be possible to rationally know all psychological realities, not least because some are neither measurable nor stable. Knowledge, therefore, will always be in a state of dismemberment. Nicolescu offers 3 axioms of transdisciplinarity to replace those of traditional science that go back to Galileo. Hitherto, many scientific disciplines adhered to the following axioms or fundamental assumptions. 1, the universe is governed by mathematical laws. 2, these laws can be discovered by scientific experiment. 3, such experiments, if valid, can be perfectly replicated. Of course, as Nicolescu emphasizes, such an approach to knowledge entails turning the human subject into an object by removing feeling and values. Nicolescu's fundamental principles, or 3 axioms for knowing in transdisciplinarity, are as follows. 1, the ontological axiom. There are in nature and in our knowledge of nature different levels of reality and correspondingly different levels of perception. 2, the logical axiom. The passage from one level of reality to another is ensured by the logic of the included middle. 3, the complexity axiom. The structure of the totality of levels of reality or perception is a complex structure. Every level is what it is because all levels exist at the same time. This approach to knowledge amounts to a paradigm shift from competing disciplines with separate perspectives to one regarding the universe as multidimensional. Reality is now complex. So are human beings. No one sense organ or academic discipline is capable of understanding all the other levels of reality. Whatever any particular knowledge claims, it will be incomplete or open. The single God of our historic privileging of rational objectivity is in pieces. In quotes, capital E, he cannot be put together to make a perfect being. Here and now is Dionysus remembered and disciplines, not knowing themselves as parts of a whole that cannot be stitched together to exclude an other. The axioms of transdisciplinarity imply an unus mundus, records Nicolescu, or one world. Knowledge is this cosmodernity. Knowledge in this cosmodernity is both unified and also multiple because of the new logic of transdisciplinarity. Instead of the dualistic traditional science model of the subject versus object, we now have a subject, object, and hidden third, the invisible connected quantum realm. This realm and the growing understanding of quantum complexity infer radical interconnectedness, a oneness that cannot be rationally plotted. Hence, the unus mundus of transdisciplinarity is Dionysian, and disciplines as parts, threaded into one by the hidden, non-rational third. They also rightly enact the multiple levels of reality in the cosmos. As Nicolescu puts it, reality is simultaneously a single and a multiple, capital O, one. Such a transdisciplinary reality can only be enacted by a new logic of the included middle to extend the binary of the subject-object into subject, included middle that is both subject and object. Revisioned in this new logic is language which in transdisciplinarity is considered in a ternary hermeneutics, not a binary one. Language becomes a quantum phenomenon, the material enactment of the hidden third as the included middle. Put another way, what Jung calls the symbol is what Nicolescu calls the symbol. Put another way, what Jung calls the symbol is what Nicolescu calls the symbol. That word image that opens into consciousness so unknown, non-rational reality. And hermeneutics means interpretation.
Yeah. You want to hold here for a minute?
Yeah.
I just realized again that my book is missing pages 258 to 265. So I'll leave it to you to decide a reasonable place to stop, since I cannot read the next 7 pages of this book.
Okay. I think this says a paragraph, a quote, and then a three-line paragraph before we get to the next section. I'll read that short third of a page, and then we can stop and discuss.
Okay.
Symbols in Jung and transdisciplinarity are dynamic, living scraps of the body of dispersed Dionysus to be remembered in the soul, to be the included middle that invokes the hidden third of quantum reality, Nicolescu. For both, symbols are ultra precise, but never fully definable in rational terms. They are never absolute truth. Nicolescu here in his wonderful From Modernity to Cosmodernity could be quoting Jung. A literal understanding of a symbol turns it into a dead, static concept without any function or value. The indefinite number of aspects of a symbol does not mean at all that the symbol is imprecise, vague, or ambiguous. On the contrary, a precise definition implies an inaccuracy of meaning, a mutilation of the symbol. Accuracy is present, though, the invariance hidden behind the indefinite multitude aspects of the symbol. The symbol and the logic of the included third are intimately linked. Or one could say that the symbols enact the included middle between the disciplines of literature and psychology. It is time to return to the Red Book as a Dionysian and transdisciplinary work. So I'd say really the included middle, it's the synapse between any two neurons. It's a stair in architecture as a space between spaces. It's that fourth character of Om, the silence in between and all around, the AUM. And I think these just different change terminology, and here we are here, but it's the no thing, no person is an island. I mean, the oceans between the islands are the big synapse. Now, you may be distant from, unable to see other things, but I think if we shift focus and redirect scale, we see the thing and the middle, and then how they relate.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think we ought to talk about for a moment is the fact that that all dreams and visions are symbols, because they are taking material that's in our unconscious and presenting it back to us as a symbol of the message that it wants to give us. And so, for example, as I have often referred to my radar detection method, whenever I am near a radar speed trap, my psyche presents to me a police car going from right to left with the word police on it. And it's black and white. It's a black and white police car. And it says police on the side of it. That vision comes to my mind, in my conscious mind, my awake mind. And I then know from experience that means there's police activity nearby. It doesn't mean necessarily that there's a radar trap, but it means that the police are up to something. And invariably, within a minute or two, I see what the activity is. And normally I have to slow down to avoid getting picked up in a speed trap. But my psyche wants to tell me all that, but it just can't spiel it back in prose to me and have me react fast enough to save me from the speed trap.
Well, it's funny because we have a similar thing. I've never ever had a speeding ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And I would use the word flagrant at least 3 times, and that means 2 times the speed limit. So it's the kind of thing where if I think about it, my foot's off the gas, not hard into the brakes, because then they can see the brake lights from a long way away.
Oh, sure.
But get down to a certain point and ease into the brakes, just like I'm, slowing down because I saw something. But that whole stealth piece of, and I'll come up and, I'll see a motorcycle doing this, and that means helmet. That means there's a police officer up. So, or someone flashes their brights or what have you. But I'm always glad I was already off the gas. And part of it too is if there's a police car and someone's pulled over, last thing I want to do, not because I'm breaking the law flying by, it's dangerous for them. He could be on the side of the car. The wind from the car could blow him around, and who knows, off the car and into the road. So, there's a whole lot of things, but then just not getting a ticket, if I take it back into context, knowing to slow the heck down, get off the racetrack and get back on the regular road, is helpful. And it's good for your insurance rates too, I'll say.
Well, yes, it does help with that. I have been stopped more than once for speeding. And probably it was because my mind was occupied with something else.
Yep.
And as a result, I didn't notice the symbol that was presented.
Right.
most of the time I can see it, but
I will
okay.
say though that in high school I did get stopped for rolling through a stop sign, which is like California roll anti-speeding.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I laugh that if I look at it, rolling through a stop sign is actually more dangerous than speeding because I could be sticking my nose out for someone else to smack and injure both of us.
Right. So Richard says, my autobiography can be written with song titles. And he had referred to I Am a Rock, I Am an Island. Um, and he says, Paul Simon experienced the mysteries. Surely he did and does. I doubt if he's done yet.
I have a friend who catalogs her music as to experiential songs. These are different chapters. This is grief. This is love. This is fun. This is happiness. This is anger. I mean, but she has all of her songs, coded, just like Richard said, the biography, um, coded to not this is a type of music, but where they belong in the movie of the life,
Yeah.
which I always find quite interesting because it takes it, you go from hard rock to folk to country to someone just reciting a poem to um, silence. Um, it's quite an interesting way to sequence things.
Yeah. So Cherie says, why was the physicist David Bohm, a protege of Einstein's, Oppenheimer turned against Bohm, and he was run out of the United States to Brazil for a while? Um, well, I have some thoughts about that. I have to think about, um,
2 words: professional jealousy,
yes,
competition.
certainly. Yeah.
I mean,
And
3 words.
he
I
had a
mean,
definition.
Oppenheimer was playing a dangerous game, and the last thing he needed was to have someone tripping him up in the dangerous game to usurp what he was leading. And Bohm could have done it. I mean,
Right,
I think.
right. Um, and I'm trying. I can only remember half of the quote that Boehm came up with, which was the end of it is in constant flowing motion. Um, I think he was defining something like the atom.
Let me look that up because that's really referring to the valence orbits, quantum of everything is just orbiting energy. Um, Let me see if I can find Bohm's quote.
Yeah, that's a good one to remember. Um, let's see.
Um, oh, come on. I'm getting David Bohm and William Blake rather than physics. Um, it's like, no, I didn't mean to spell it that way. Um,
Quantum mechanical phenomenon in which an electrically charged particle is affected by an electromagnetic potential. Uh, shoot. Um, well, time concept. Okay, I've searched that long enough, and
Yeah,
we don't.
there are too
Yeah,
many. Do you mean? Do you mean? Do you mean? It's like, no, I typed it and I meant it. It's like,
yeah, right. But anyway, it relates to quantum physics.
oh, so
Um,
again, constant flowing motion. And I think what happens is, it's Boehm also said if you're not confused by quantum physics, you don't get it. But the thing is, that's called nature. Quantum physics is another way to describe nature, except it's multiple. You get nature, not just I see this, but all the middle things that I don't see also, whether it's
yeah,
microscopic or multidimensional. Um, so I think back to three words: professional jealousy and competition.
yeah,
Boehm got it, and um, Oppenheimer knew he got it. So two chefs in the kitchen is one too many.
yeah. Righto. Um, so I probably need to call this to a halt at this point because I'm not going to get through another 8 pages at this
Yeah, and we'll
point.
start a new chapter. I think we've the horse is dead. We've beaten this one enough. So
Yeah, that's right. I think that's fair enough. That if you have this book, get this book. If you need to read more about Rowland's ideas here, um,
thanks for all the great comments and questions today from people on
yeah,
YouTube.
right. Well, let's see where I resume. I resume with Russell
Eight,
Lockhart. Hmm?
you resume.
Appassionato for the imagination.
Okay, so you resume on page 269, and we're on page 259 now.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah, so you're missing the rest of this chapter in the end notes. So
yeah,
I can just continue next week, and just like we did today.
yeah. So a couple things to talk about because we're getting up to the end of the year. And so I want to talk about when we are going to meet and when we aren't. So there's going to be 2 more sessions in December. Next week, the 8th, and the following week, the 15th. Then, because my daughter's 50th birthday is the 21st, I am going to travel incognito for a surprise party um, on the 21st, and we'll be celebrating that surprise on the 22nd. Um, and hopefully I will also get to see my sister, who is now confined to a nursing home and cannot take responsibility for her own life, apparently. So I'm going to visit with
Sorry to
her
hear that.
briefly. I think her health is probably okay, but uh, she makes mistakes if she's out and about, and so I have to go visit her.
Well, I remember when we had to go find my grandmother because she took a walk, but um, she had it's like an 8 block by 8 block neighborhood safety, not crossing
Yeah.
major streets. She took a walk, and 5 minutes after she walked out the door, fog rolled in. And since she couldn't see halfway down the block, she got terrified. All of a sudden my phone rings and she's like, I don't know where I am. I can't find myself. And when she said, I can't find myself, I knew she was in the confusion piece of the dementia rather
Yeah.
than I can't find my way home. But so, immediately it was slowly drive through the fog in her neighborhood until, found her standing there on the sidewalk. And fortunately, that's as far as that went,
Yeah.
so here, hop in, we'll get you there. But because of the fog, basically her whole horizon disappeared.
Yeah. I'm sure. Let's see. was gonna try to well, I can show you the original pale blue dot picture, which is on my screen now. This is not the Cassini picture that I was showing you earlier. This is the actual pale blue dot that was originally imaged by Carolyn Porco. And she was following a plan that, and as you see in this, there's an article here by her about doing this. And she does credit Carl Sagan for coming up with the idea of photographing it. But, you know, this was taken 25 years before the other picture that I normally use, which is a Cassini picture. This one was taken by Voyager, and it was taken in the middle of the night at the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Okay, I'm lost.
No, I think the pale blue dot is the perfect way to end it. You know, focus
Yeah.
back out to the big scale and go back into the week. Thanks again
Right.
to everybody for the
All
comments.
right. So basically, we're going to take 3 weeks off from both the Sunday session. We have 2 more for Sunday and 3 more for the Wednesday sessions. And then as Christmas Day and New Year's Day both fall on Wednesdays, we won't be doing those classes in the advanced lit reading group. So we're going to take our December 3-week hiatus, but it's mainly because of the holidays that are upon us.
Yeah.
So we'll be back for 2 more weeks. Just wanted to let you know. And let's see. Cherie says a hidden variable, and that is what got Bohm in trouble with Oppenheimer outfolding or infolding in memory to make it short. Okay, well, all right. Anyway,
that's a good point actually about the hidden included middle of the hidden variable. Is this infolding or outfolding? And you know, Oppenheimer might have said, well, that's monkey business. It's not relevant. And Boehm would have been more, it's not applicable. It's present, but relevancy has little to do with it. He would be more, yeah, well, I want to know all the things because we're about to, you know, blow some huge thing up. So I want to know all the things. It felt to me that way. Oppenheimer was more of a push, lead by priority, and Boehm was the same, except he wanted to know even the things that he couldn't see, because would he be potentially affecting them?
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's a good point, Cherie.
For some reason, we seem to have our feed seems to have stopped on YouTube. So you and I are just talking to ourselves. So I will wish you a good weekend and see you next Sunday.
Sounds good.